everyone. Welcome to the Self-Awareness Journey podcast. I'm Melissa Albers.
And I'm JJ Parker. This podcast is for seekers, seekers of happiness and joy, seekers of a centered approach to success in life, seekers of their true, authentic selves.
Get ready for some real talk on everything from anxiety, emotions, and habits to love, compassion, and forgiveness. We know you'll be challenged and enlightened by this conversation. We're so glad you're here. Let's dive in. So, JJ, you know my daughter is getting married in a couple of weeks. Pretty exciting stuff. And we're just in the journey with these kids, right? As they're getting ready for everything, getting ready to be ready to be ready. It's double check, triple check. And it got me reflecting on when I was getting married, even though it was, decades ago now.
A minute ago. Well, that's gotta be interesting, right? To go through that journey with your daughter, but reflect on when you went through it.
Well,
a few years ago.
It's so funny how people have been treating us too. Side note, how people have been treating us in these conversations, because they're like, oh, your daughter's getting married. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, how's it going? There's...
Oh, there's like there's like undertone that you're like not familiar with, or maybe you're currently learning.
Yeah. And obviously the mother of the bride and the bride must have lots of stuff in between these planning events. Like, that must be a thing, because Megan and I have been just great. Like, we're having a really good time with everything. However, as I've been reflecting, I'm like, oh, I wonder what we should do about this topic. And then everyone gives you their advice, whether you ask or not. And then want to tell you all about their experiences, whether you ask or not. It's a bit like, oh, you have to have a crown put on. Oh, let me tell you the 32 horrible dentist experiences I've had. Yeah. I don't know. People just have this natural, I don't know if it's just like, that's what they can remember. And so they just have to share it, or I don't know.
Well, and I think there's probably something about like weddings too.
Yeah.
Like weddings are such like, for a lot of us, like that was like probably like the biggest, most planned event of our life.
Yes,
right.
Precisely.
So it's always easy to like
refer
back to it.
Well, and one of the things I've always tried to think, and it hasn't been hard actually, is this isn't my wedding, it's hers. I've already had my wedding, right? I've already had my wedding. So I don't have to be that invested in if she has bowls of candy on each table. I don't really care what she does. She doesn't want bowls of candy at her table. But anyway, here's what I was thinking about. I couldn't believe how many flashbacks I was having and have been having during this whole event, this planning event, as they have been going through their experiences. So as the wedding's getting closer and closer, so now it's like 2 weeks away. Actually, I think it's 2 weeks from today, although by the time this is aired, we're probably going to be past post-event. But the number of times that people, while I was young and in that stage, the number of times that people really let me down when I had certain expectations.
Oh, that's an interesting thing. So like when you were getting married, you had expectations of what like your family's going to do, your friends were going to do.
Right.
And that didn't line up. And
exactly.
that led to a letdown.
Yeah, it leads to a really big letdown. And my examples are pretty extreme. I can never just have the, run of the mill normal. Oh, that's interesting. Mine are always like shocking examples, right?
It wasn't like I was let down by the florist because they had off-white flowers and not white flowers.
Exactly. No, mine was, my mother was sewing my wedding dress, and a week and a half before the wedding, my wedding dress was in pieces on the floor still. Like, it was extreme stress, extreme trauma.
Yeah.
And it was so excruciatingly anxiety provoking. So I didn't know whether the dress was going to be done or not. And I was so terribly let down because I had very strong expectations that it would be done early. It would be, sitting on a mannequin for a month in a window somewhere.
Yeah, you'd be doing that thing where you like put it on and look at yourself in the mirror and twirl around like a Disney movie, right?
Well, JJ, that's so good. Thank you for being in my head. Yeah, that's not what happened. What happened was she was sewing my sleeves shut while I was getting in the car to go to the church.
Wow.
Absolute, complete stress. And 20 minutes prior to that, oh, we didn't make you a veil. Here, scissor, 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 cut, 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 so. Put this on your head. Now, strangely, it turned out perfectly. It turned out perfectly.
Yeah.
But the stress of someone letting me down, regardless of who it is, right? That's a thing. Like, we get really, especially during important times of our lives, I think we get really into a strong mode of what we want people to do just for us, just this once. Or we even tell ourselves stories. We set people up to not do well in these scenarios. And then in big situations, we make them even more, it's like a stronger expectation, even if it's bordering on not true or fantasy even.
Yeah.
I see that happening, and I see that happening for Megan and Tej in certain things too. And it's just it's amazing how often that happens, how we get expectations of people during certain times for us that we want something, and then they let us down.
Well, let's dive into some of that. Like, when I feel like I get let down,
Yeah.
like, a lot of times, it doesn't feel good, obviously. Like, feeling let down doesn't feel good. It feels like you're unsupported, like no one cares.
Yes, exactly.
Like you're really alone. Like, to me, it feels like I'm just out in the middle of nowhere alone.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
there's no help here. Where are my friends? Where are my family?
Right, right.
Like, why did everyone abandon me? Right?
Yeah.
Whether that's true or not.
Yeah, it's a story we tell ourselves.
Feeling. Yeah, that's the feeling I get.
Yeah, I think that's really true.
So I think first, like, we talk about like really exploring that feeling for yourself first.
Yeah.
Right? Like, kind of like step one in being let down to me is like, let's really get in touch with what you're actually feeling. And so, because it's so easy to turn into being like mad.
Oh, that's exactly where people go instantly, is really mad or absolutely crushed.
Or blaming, like, oh, that person is such an a-hole,
Right.
or like, I can't believe they did it again. And like, just turn that external. But if you can keep it like internal and you can explore that yourself first.
Yeah, exactly. Have you ever had experiences that you can recall in this conversation where you have felt really let down?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess my big example, like, is probably like with my like ex-business partner.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And like, we started a company when we were 19, right?
Yes.
Kind of like swords up and blazing trails and all that like together, and then it just kind of fizzled and went sideways, and it was kind of like, I thought we were going to get to kind of like the finish line
together,
and we didn't. And there was the kind of like the point that I remember most is like, one day I went into his office and I'm like, dude, like, I can't do this by myself. Like, I need my business partner back, and you have not been my business partner.
Right.
Like, you're not here anymore. Again, don't.
Right.
And it was just like, and he was just off with these, like, on a whole different project, on a whole different thing.
Yeah.
And I was just like, that was like the moment where I'm like, oh, okay, it's gone.
It's a devastating feeling when someone, I mean, and it doesn't matter the circumstances, whether it's you're at home and it's your personal life or it's your business life. I think it feels like when we have times where we don't feel very solid, when we feel kind of wobbly, we really want to fall into the arms of those that we love, even if it's not right.
Yeah.
And there's I think it can really lead to feelings of real devastation, especially if they've been relationships that you've had in your life for a really long time. Because I think as human beings, I think we say it's easy to make, some of us feel that it's easy to make friends or to have deep relationships. But that being said, the level of vulnerability that you show, and maybe that's the key in this piece, is that when you feel vulnerable, or when you're, there's
Mhm.
it's a situation where you feel very vulnerable. Even if you're someone who's quite sovereign and used to standing on your own, there's a real natural instinct to run into the middle of your people,
Mm.
for support or
Yeah.
safety. Maybe it's that safety feeling it gives you, even a
Yeah,
false
that's kind
sense
of
of
yeah,
safety.
that's kind of like our kind of tribe
Mhm.
instinct, right?
Yeah.
Like get back in with our, core group of people for safety
Yeah.
and protection.
Yeah.
The other thing that like I notice when I'm let down is beyond the feelings. It's like uh, my mind will spin on it a lot,
Yeah. Mhm.
right? Like
Mhm.
I'll go back to it a lot. I'll think about it a
Mm.
lot,
Mhm.
um, which is not useful,
Right.
but it's hard. Like it's hard to get kind of past it sometimes, right?
Right.
Because it's like to me, it's like an unresolved thing,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And it's just hanging
Yeah.
there, unresolved, and you just want to
Yeah. Yeah.
think your way out of it somehow, and that just doesn't happen.
Yeah. I think that's true, and actually then it hangs there, and it actually can cause it can cause a rift or cause a wall between you and that person that you were feeling that way about. It really can create
Oh,
more of the
totally.
same.
It makes it
Makes it
worse, right?
way worse, way
Yeah.
worse.
And it creates like the whole like elephant in the room
Yeah, for
thing, and then
sure.
you're like walking on
Mhm.
eggshells, and then but the other person like literally might not even
I
know that they
agree.
let you down,
I totally agree.
right? And then like then the thing kind of turns the other way. It's like the other person's like, why are you acting so
Yeah,
weird?
exactly. "Did you do something I don't know about? What's wrong?"
Yeah,
Maybe
exactly.
well, maybe they aren't like I thought they were. Yeah, it does. It actually erodes the whole everything. There's a lot of other times, like, I even recall when our kids were babies, Mitch and I had very specific and unrealistic expectations about what the grandparents would be like with our kids.
Mm, mm-hmm.
And it was very idyllic, which I think is very normal when you're young. I think it's super normal to
Oh
be
yeah.
idealistic when you're
Yeah.
young. We did a pod on that, didn't we? Not too long ago. Didn't we? I can't remember. Now you're gonna laugh and
Oh
say,
my gosh, we did half a pod on that because remember, like our recording software like freaked
"Oh."
out. Talk about being let down. Our recording software let us down halfway through a
Oh
pod.
my gosh, that was last week.
That was last week.
Okay. Well, anyway, so back to our story. But I remember, Mitch and I we talked endlessly about, grandparents should be this way. Like I'm doing air quotes.
Hmm.
You know, they'll be at every T-ball game. They'll, hold hands with our children as they bring them to the zoo every Saturday. Okay, I'm being a
Right, and
little
like
over the top.
butterflies will be flapping
Yes,
around, and
exactly.
they'll always
Yeah,
have
yes.
lemonade.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I think that that's a very common thing too. Like we had these really strong expectations about the people that we loved that were in our lives. We expected it to be something very different than what a
Hmm.
natural, realistic approach would be. Like, for example, um, most of our parents, the kids' grandparents, were still business owners or working or in big jobs when our kids
Mm.
were that age. So to have this expectation that they would stop everything because our, 1-year-old and 2-year-old were so cute. Like, wouldn't you,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And so it is funny. And now looking back on it is pretty obvious, like how we set ourselves up and we set them up for failure.
Well, yeah, and what you're saying is that like you need to consider the other person's
Yeah.
perspective or life
Right.
or situation a little bit more. It's really easy to
Right.
focus when you have a disappointment like that. It's easy to focus it on you
Right.
and not really take into account
Yes.
the other
The
person.
realism of the other person,
Yeah.
and so we're talking about, how it kind of breaks just with us setting up unrealistic expectations. However, and we've been
Hmm.
talking about like normal, healthy, unrealistic expectations as it relates to those in our lives that we love. But we also then need to address the people that are not healthy in our lives, that we have
Mm.
expectations of them being something totally different in certain
Hmm.
scenarios, right?
Hmm.
So there's people that have mental illness, for example.
Hmm.
Many of us have alcoholism in our families, in pockets of our
Hmm.
families, or other types of issues or challenges in our families. And we have, it seems that when we're in these periods of our own lives where we want that extra support, we see people not as they really are, but we see them
Mm.
as we wish they were.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is also a very, very common thing. Like,
That's a really interesting way to phrase it, that you see people the way you wish they were.
yeah,
And that's where the disappointment comes from.
yeah, yes,
When they don't live up to what you wish they were.
right. And I think that's when you start tacking on all of those wishes, all of those
Mm-hmm.
expectations about that person. For example, alcoholism. So I don't have any direct experience with alcoholism in my family, but I know many, many of those that are close to me that do. And I have a lot of
Mm-hmm.
clients where that's the case too. And alcohol is a scary, mean, insidious thing, and it changes life in a New York second. So
Mm-hmm.
expectations within families, or any time where there's more strong pressure, things can go sideways in just an absolute nanosecond.
Mm-hmm.
And then not only are you disappointed about that event, but then you start, it's a cumulative thing, because you start thinking, oh,
Mm-hmm.
and this they did this time, and they did this the time before that, and the time before
Mm-hmm.
that. Why do I always want them to be something they're not? And then I think it's easy to get really sideways and feel extremely let down, and then start to get mad at ourselves too.
Yeah. Yeah, those situations are hard to deal
Yeah.
with, right? Because at what point does kind of being let down, where's the line between that and like really holding someone maybe accountable
Mhm.
for something?
Right.
Right? Like you said you were going to be at the kids' soccer game, you didn't show up to kids' soccer game.
Yeah.
Like instead of just being let down that whatever, dad didn't show up to the soccer game,
Mhm.
how do you hold that person in your life accountable to doing the things
Yeah.
that maybe they said they would do?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, actually, isn't this interesting? Because what I just thought when you said that, it's like so true, because right there, so we have these expectations, we get really, really disappointed because those expectations are not met, and it's extremely
Mm-hmm.
disappointing, and that happens over and over and over again, and it starts to leave a mark, right? It starts to leave a
Yep.
divot in our soul, in our system. Okay,
Yep.
so then we have two choices. We can we have three. We can ignore it and keep doing
Mm-hmm.
what we always do and just be more and more disappointed, and then just try to
Yep.
pretend like we're over it until the next time. Two, we can become angry,
Mm-hmm.
and then we can become more sovereign and decide to hold someone truly accountable and have a different kind of relationship with that person. That
Mm-hmm.
in and of itself is also super scary. I mean, that's
Yeah.
really scary to hold somebody, especially if they're a generation older than you. So your uncle, your aunt, your dad, your mom,
Mm.
all of where the natural order of things is that you are below them in the hierarchy,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
but I think the other thing that happens if you don't do one of those two things is I think you start feeling like a victim.
Mm-hmm.
I think you start feeling
Yeah.
like a victim, and then everything changes to a victimhood sort of trauma experience, where you
Yeah.
start blaming yourself. You start saying, well, I'm just the person in the family that no one helps. I'm a
Mm.
victim. I can't help myself. No one helps me. Woe is me. And now you've turned it
Yeah.
inward, and everything becomes really different.
Yeah. Yeah, those are three interesting paths. So what do you do about that? I mean, we talked a little bit about like at the top, like explore your feelings, like
Mhm.
kind of get in touch with it.
Yeah.
Maybe work on staying more present and not letting your thoughts like churn on the disappointment or the thing
Yeah.
that you got let down on.
Yeah.
But I think there's more than that. I mean, we talked about adjusting your expectations.
Yeah, exactly. Oh,
Right?
that's
Maybe
a
your
good one. Yeah.
expectations are way too
Right.
high.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Yeah. So how do you inventory
Right?
that? Like, how do you know if your expectations are high? Like, what do you think we could do?
I just have terribly low expectations for everybody. I'm still amazed you showed up to this
Oh, me
pod.
too.
Every week.
Every week.
Every week I'm amazed. Well, it shouldn't be lower your expectations, right? But
Well,
get
but wait, oh,
realistic
wait.
expectations. Sometimes they're
Yeah.
really crazy expectations, like way
Yes.
too high expectations,
Yes.
especially for sometimes like the kind of relationship you might have,
Mhm.
right? Like you might have like a casual friend relationship
Yeah. Yep.
where you might expect way more from somebody
Mm.
than they think the relationship should have,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That's so true. That's so true. And that would be because of like like this is at the crux of it, right? Is from the very start, it's like these expectations aren't met and the expectations and we've
Hmm.
talked about expectations before. I always say expectations are resentments waiting to happen. And in this situation, the expectations are just your natural part of being in with other people and like wanting to help others. Like even you might have an expectation that you're going to help someone else more than they want to be helped.
Totally, right?
Yeah.
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 Why aren't you letting me help you
Yeah.
move?
Yeah.
Said
Yeah.
nobody. Um,
Right, bring your trailer. Right, right. Why aren't you letting me help you, like, change your personal looks? How come you're not letting me, like, get you a better boyfriend? Because you always pick losers. Yeah, there's
yeah.
expectations go that side too, and we get disappointed.
Well, even, I mean, whether it's like a friend relationship or even if you're like, I'm trying to remember back when you're trying to pursue a romantic relationship.
Yeah,
It's like one person might be way more into it than the
right,
other, right?
right.
Or they don't want that kind of level of relationship. They just want something a little bit easier and funner, right?
Don't you think did you just say funner?
I did. We got to edit that part out.
No, leave it in there. I expect people will get a kick out of that.
let I let myself down.
Um, you know what I actually think the answer in all this is? This is gonna sound so cliche coming from me. I actually think it's really in your own awareness about your what you're expecting and why. It has very
Yeah.
little to do with the other person.
Hmm. Oh yeah, I agree. It has very little to do with the other person.
Even if they're
It's all you.
even if they're your mom, your dad, your brother, your
Hmm.
sister, your best friend. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter if you it's what is your own awareness of yourself and why you're asking them to do or be these
Yeah.
things.
Well, the other thing I was thinking about was right there is like you said why you're asking them to do those
Mhm.
things, but a lot of times we don't express what our needs are,
Yes.
and then we
Yeah,
expect
yeah.
someone to do something and we didn't even tell them.
Right.
Right? That's in my experience, that's a ton of times where I'll feel let down is I'll be like,
Oh.
"Well, why didn't" yeah, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Why didn't Amber do the dishes?
Yep.
Did we have a dishes episode? I think we
Yeah.
did.
Couple.
Why didn't anyone in my family do the dishes? I feel so let down.
Yeah.
Well, did I express that I really needed that
Yeah.
done? No.
Right.
So like I didn't express that I needed it done. Then I was disappointed that no one did it.
Yeah.
What
But the
that
feeling
doesn't
was
make
really
any
strong
sense.
in you that it would have made you feel really good if it
Yeah.
had been done. So, yeah, it's the same
Yeah, so
thing.
like don't have people guess what you need. Just express it, right?
Or yes, and and express what you need, be more willing to be honest with your own needs. And I also think the
Mhm.
other thing is think not just to the expression part of what it is, but why. What does it
Mm.
represent for you? Like in the example with our parents as new grandparents having this unrealistic expectation that they would be with our little kids all the time. What did that
Mhm.
represent for me? And the truth of the matter is, this is like, I think that the truth of the matter is it represented what a deep nuclear family would look like and that these little children would feel completely loved and supported all the time. Because there was a lot of
Mhm.
times when I was growing up where I maybe didn't feel that way. And you always want
Mm.
I think you always want more for your children than what you had yourself, even if what you had was wonderful. I think as a
Yeah.
natural human thing is like you wanna be people that are especially if you have children, you want them to have these perfect lives. You don't want them to experience any pain or hardship.
Mhm.
So sometimes it's coming from a really good place and sometimes it's coming from a pretty sideways place because you aren't taking your own inventory. But I think the
Yeah.
key really is understanding where it's coming from and why.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good to be mindful of. So, what happens if you're in a relationship and you just get disappointed over and over and you try to express what you need and it's just not met?
Yeah. You know,
Move on. Just move
no,
on.
I think, you know what I think? I think it's, and I've had a number of relationships in my life like this where I have had really strong expectations and those haven't been met. And with the relationships that really matter to me, I have changed my expectations. And not only did I
Mm,
change my core expectation, I also changed how I thought and how I felt about the other
mm,
person. So I
hmm
released them of all of the expectation. I released them of all of the shoulda, woulda, couldas, and I gave to them what I wanted for me.
mm,
Actually, case in point is my dad. I always wanted my dad to be like, "Oh, I love you, Melissa. You know, great job." And my dad was a guy who was just used to being a leader type. You know, and
mm,
in his the way he was raised, that wasn't what you did, right? So I had all these
hmm
expectations. Oh, it's going to be totally different. Well, he didn't have any clue of that. And so I would kind of push
Yeah.
on these things with these expectations. And he was like, what is going, like, what are you doing? What are you doing?
You just left them
Yeah,
confused.
exactly right. But this is, this is, a couple decades ago, but I'm going to just say now what I did is I just released him of all these things that I expected him to be or do or say,
Hmm.
and now I have the best relationship with my dad. I absolutely get the biggest
Oh.
kick out of him. We have so much fun. And every time I talk to him on the phone, he says, I love you.
Hmm.
It's just things change when you
Yeah,
allow the
that's so
change
interesting. Like
inside.
you made the change, and then the thing you actually wanted
Yes. And
followed after you released
that's
it.
the way
Yeah.
life is the change must be
Wow.
made inside of you. If it's what you desire, you have to be what it is that you want in order for what you want to come to you more.
Did you enjoy this episode? Please go to your favorite podcast platform to subscribe, rate, and leave a review so others can discover it as well.
Growing self-awareness is a lifelong journey, and there's always further to go. And it's better when we're all in it together. Please think of someone you know who could benefit from hearing today's conversation and share this episode with them. We can't thank you enough for listening. Until next time, happy exploring, seekers.